In a previous episode of CodeDependent, I very crassly and unfairly showed you how to run an animation that actually wasn't quite good enough. It was still important to understand how to animate the properties of items in a VBox so that you could automatically remove and add objects to the VBox container and animate that. But there was kind of a jarring artifact in there where you couldn't animate all the properties good enough. So we sort of got a snapping artifact as gaps for these objects would be added to the VBox. Or the gaps would be removed, and we kind of got a snapping effect that really wasn't quite pleasant. So today, I want to make up for that by showing you how to access the inner capabilities of state transitions to actually run custom effects to get a much smoother container effect. So let's take a look at an application that works a little bit better. Actually, let's take a look at the previous application, and we'll show why you might want a better approach. So as we add a row, this is what we saw in the previous episode. You get a snapping artifact when the animation first runs, right? It snaps by, I don't know, 4 or 5 pixels, right? And similarly, when we delete a button, it'll fade nicely, resize nicely, and then it'll snap right at the end. And the problem is the gap, right? We're automatically adding a gap. It jumps by a few pixels just because that's the way the container works. It adds the gap even though the button itself may be of size 0. Right, so how can we compensate for that? So let's run the better approach here where when we add a row, we smoothly resize the whole way down. Right? So we add again, get this nice resizing and fading behavior. Similarly, when we delete the button, we fade it out, we resize all the way down. I don't see a snapping artifact from the gap. And the way it works is by using transitions. So transitions in Flex work by when you change state, it goes out and it grabs the before state information and the after state information. So it says, where are you now? What property values do you have? What property values do you have after the state transition? It records these as deltas, and it runs the effects that you've specified for the transition and says, OK, here are the before and after properties. So go ahead and populate automatically the X from, the Y from, the width and the height information you need to. Fade looks at the alpha value, stuff like that. Right? Well, you can actually use that for your own effects and use the same information even for running a dynamic animation or a dynamic effect when you're not actually doing a state-to-state transition. And here's how it works. So we have a similar setup as we did before. We've got a VBox. We populate it with a couple of buttons to start off with. And then when we click our button in the upper left, we'll go ahead and call the add row function. And we'll go up here. Actually, before we do that, we'll take a look at the animations we've defined. So before, this was in our previous application, we actually defined sequences that we ran. In this one, we're going to define these individual animations that we're going to populate and run on the fly. We have one for moving and fading the object in. So this is actually going to do a move of the button, and it's going to do a fade of the button over time. And similarly, we have a fade out and a move out that's going to fade and move buttons. And when a button gets added, we're going to call our add row function up above. And we say, OK, let's go ahead and create a button. A lot of this is similar to the way it worked in the previous application. We create the button. We assign it a label. We use this randomized color, which looks awful, but it's important for you to understand in the animation what's actually going on in the UI. So we assign it a color, and then we add an event listener so that when they click on the button, we'll automatically call our remove row so that we can run the reverse animation. We're going to define it just like we did before, an alpha value of 0, so that the button by default is completely transparent so that we can then fade the thing in. Now, we're going to go ahead and define targets for our move in of not just the button, but actually everything in the VBox. So all of the buttons in the VBox are going to be moving. And where are they moving to? Well, we'll figure that out through capturing some values here. We're also going to set a fade in target. So we're going to set that to just the new button itself, not all of the buttons in the VBox, because we don't want to fade everything in. Then we're going to call a function called capture start values. So our move in object is going to go out to the VBox and say, where are all the buttons now? Same thing for fade in. So for all of the targets it's operating on, which are just that single button that we're going to fade in, we're going to capture the start values for it. Then we're going to add our new button to the VBox, right? And we haven't changed the size of it, so it's actually going to be added in as a real item. And the layout is going to run here in a second. And it's going to reposition everything. And now all of the buttons in the VBox from that button on down are going to have new positions in the VBox. So we add the button in there, then we call validate now to make sure that layout actually runs and the VBox does reposition everything, and then we play our effects. And in the meantime, some magic is happening. When we play the effects, the play function in effect actually goes out and says, okay, is there a transition running, which in particular means check whether there are start values that have been captured for this effect already. And in this case, we've captured start values for the move and the fade that we want to run. So it'll say, okay, well, if someone's captured start values, then I'd better go out and capture the end values and get the deltas and populate the effects with that information. So now it's going to go out, when we call play on these effects, it's going to grab the end values for all of the button positions, and it's going to grab the end value for the alpha, and it'll automatically populate the effects that we have down below with those values. And then it'll go ahead and launch the effects. And in reverse, when someone clicks on a button, we're going to do exactly the same thing. So we're going to say our fade out is given a target of the current button that was clicked. Our move out targets are going to be all of the buttons in the VBox. Some of them aren't going to move, but everyone from the everyone that's below the button that we clicked on is going to be moving up. So we're going to go out and capture the start values for all of those targets. Then we're going to go ahead and remove the object from the container. We're going to validate layout, so the VBox is actually going to run layout and reposition all the buttons. Then we're going to play the effect, and same thing happens. It's going to go out and say, oh, someone's captured the start values. Let me go ahead and capture the end values, figure out all the new values, populate the effects that I'm running with those new values, and then run the effects. And note that when we actually run layout here, it's not running visibly. This is one of the tricks that makes the whole system work, is that we're running layout, but we haven't actually displayed anything on the screen, right? Flex and the Flash and Flash applications in general are single-threaded, which means we can run layout, but you won't actually see any effect on the screen until we hand control back to some calling function, and it actually displays the next frame of the Flash application. But in this case, the other thing that's going on in effect.play is it goes out and captures the end values, provides the deltas to the effect, and then rolls the values back to the start values, right? So the overall way the transitions work are we capture start values, we call play, that captures the end values, it rolls everything back to the start values it had to begin with, and then it plays the effects. So it works both forward and reverse. So we capture the before values of the buttons. Before it's added, we add the button, we run layout, everything's moved down. We capture the end values, then we roll everything back to where it came from. Then we play the animation, and it runs over time. The other thing that you sometimes have to do, I didn't have to do it in this particular case, is actually disable layout on the container so that you're not actually running an animation and the layout is trying to position things all at the same time. So you can do that easily by disabling layout on the container itself. And that is it. So what we get at the end of all that is a much smoother animation that does the resizing and fading in a way that we were really hoping to do from the start. If you want to see the code for this application and other related applications, check out my blog at graphics-geek.blogspot.com.